Okay, good afternoon. And we're going to take a trip up the Atlantic seaboard, and we're going to go to Prince Edward Island. Anybody been to Prince Edward Island here? It's great, isn't it? You sail into Prince Edward Island, and you see this reddish type soil. Excuse me?
Doesn't work for Mike.
How's that? It's working?
Yeah.
Okay. So anyway, we're going to sail into Prince Edward Island, and then from there we're going to go over to Nova Scotia. And, how many colonies were there when America started? 13. That could have been the 14th. The 14th colony being Nova Scotia. But Canada Day is on July the 1st, and it will be the 157th anniversary of Canada becoming a country on July 1st, and Prince Edward Island is where Canada actually originated. But PEI starts as part of Nova Scotia. In 1604, the Kingdom of France laid claim to the islands of the Maritimes under the Discovery Doctrine, including Prince Edward Island, establishing the French colony of Acadia. The island was named Ile Saint-Jean, or John's Island by the French. The local people, the Mi'kmaq, they were the Native Americans or First Nations tribe, never recognized the claim, but welcomed the French as trading partners and allies nonetheless. St. John's Island becomes a British island. The island is administered as part of the colony of North America until it's split into a separate colony in 1769. During and after the American Revolutionary War from 1776 to 1783, the colonists tried to get the loyalists from the 13 colonies to move there, and some of them ended up at Prince Edward Island. This is Acadia. By the way, how many of you have read the book Evangeline, or heard the poem rather, Evangeline? You have, right?
Could you speak a little louder, please?
And is this better? Okay. This is what I got to work with here. So I don't know if, how's that? How's that? Is that any better?
I don't know, you're not speaking.
Okay, is that better? Okay. So in 1798, the British take Prince Edward Island, and they name the colony for Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, and Strathern. And he was alive between 1767 and 1820. He was the fourth son of King George III. I think you've heard of King George, haven't you? And later, the father of Queen Victoria. Prince Edward Island has been called the father of the Canadian crown. And you sail into it, and you see this rock formation, which is actually rather nice. It's rusty, and it's actually a very nice island. Not much to do there, but it's a nice island. But it's time to form a country. The Americans are involved in the Civil War, and the Canadians are, well, they aren't Canada yet. It's British North American territory. They're worried that some of that Civil War might spill into the Northern British territory. In September 1864, 23 delegates or representatives from the Maritimes, New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, and Prince Edward Island meet in Charlottetown to discuss the formation of a country. It was the beginning of discussions that would eventually lead to the formation of Canada on July 1st, 1867. And there I am in Charlottetown, PEI, and I'm standing in the middle of the 1864 sculpture. Prince Edward Island hosted the Charlottetown Conference, which was the first meeting in the process, leading to the Quebec resolutions and the creation of Canada. And they would meet in this place. Last time I was up there, this place, Confederate Hall, was being renovated, and they decided, hey, we got to do something. We're afraid of the United States. Now that they have Alaska, they may come this way to invade us. So let's become a country. Prince Edward Island, though, does not become part of Canada. They did not think that the terms of joining the Union were favorable to them, and they balked at joining in 1867, choosing to stay with the United Kingdom. How many of you have heard of Tim Hortons Donuts in Canada? You can't go anywhere without running into a Tim Hortons. It's all over the place. And I don't think they got the donuts back in 1867 across the street from Confederate Hall, but anyway, there's a Tim Hortons. In the late 1860s, the colony, Prince Edward Island, was in a dither, and they were looking at various options. Maybe joining the Dominion, or maybe joining the United States. The United States wasn't all that interested. However, if you look at where it is in the map, it's right there in the middle of the St. Lawrence Seaway, or in those days, the St. Lawrence River. So PEI officials do meet with the members of the President Ulysses S. Grant administration, and they're discussing trade options, even to the point of, hey, take us in as a state. But the colony could not join the United States. In fact, it wasn't even allowed to negotiate because, well, they're part of Britain. It's British North American territory, so that stops it. That's Confederation Center of the Arts, and those are all the flags of the various Canadian provinces. In 1871, the colony begins the construction of a railroad across the island, but they're frustrated by Great Britain's colonial office, and they begin negotiations with the United States. In 1873, the Canadian Prime Minister, Sir John A. Macdonald, anxious to thwart American expansionism. After all, America wanted British Columbia at some point, and they're looking at Hawaii and ways to knock off the Kingdom of Hawaii. He says, look, PEI, join Canada. We'll take care of you. And on July 1st, in 1873, Prince Edward Island joined the Confederation. There is a bridge now that connects Nova Scotia to, or rather New Brunswick, to Prince Edward Island. It is called the Confederation Bridge. And when they got the bridge, all of a sudden people discovered Prince Edward Island as 740,000 visitors were there in 1996, and 1.2 million were there in 1997. Got a question for you. How many of you read the book Anne of Green Gables? Did you like it?
Yeah.
Yeah? Well, you know where it takes place?
Must be
Prince Edward Island. And when you're greeted, when the tourists are greeted in Charlottetown, you get Anne of Green Gables herself saying, "Welcome to Prince Edward Island." Lucy Maud Montgomery was born in Clifton, now called New London, in 1874, and she wrote about 20 novels and humorous stories that have been collected into anthologies. Her first Anne book, Anne of Green Gables, was published in 1908. A musical play every year, Anne of Green Gables, runs in Charlottetown, and it has been running for more than 4 decades. Well, that's about it. So we're going to take the boat and we're going to head down to Sydney, Nova Scotia, and eventually Halifax. Do you want the nosh? You don't want Nova Scotia lox? They're not called Nova Scotia lox in Halifax. Smoked salmon. Nova Scotia. How many of you have had Nova Scotia lox? Right? Oh yeah, lox. Bagel, cream cheese, and what else?
Sure.
Lox. Generally, they come from that area. When you go to Sydney, well, Sydney is a Gaelic town, and Scottish fiddlers are all over the place. That is when you go to Sydney and you're on a boat, that's what you're greeted with, a big fiddle. Nova Scotia. The 14th colony. Now, how many of you know that Nova Scotia was thinking about joining the southern colonies? None of you?
No.
Oh, so do you want to know?
Yeah.
Okay.
Why not?
Had circumstances been, yes?
I only know Nova Scotia to eat. I didn't know that.
Oh, the Nova Scotia lox.
Nova
The
Scotia.
Nova Scotia lox. Bagels, cream cheese, and lox. And they do have good restaurants, particularly in Halifax. Had circumstances been a bit different, it is possible that Nova Scotia and New Brunswick, which was once part of Nova Scotia, could have been one of the first states in the newly formed United States of America. Nova Scotia has quite a bit of history. In fact, it has a lot of history. including a custom down in the southern United States, which started out up in Nova Scotia, or people that started out in Nova Scotia. Quite a bit of history took place prior to the American Revolution on the peninsula that helped shape what we now know as modern-day Canada and the United States. Alexander Graham Bell, telephone. Where do you think the telephone was invented? Nova Scotia. United States network radio is actually, the idea for it is born in Nova Scotia. It seems that the idea was hatched because of the 1912 Titanic sinking and a thoughtful telegraph operator in New York named David Sarnoff. That's the port of Halifax. It's a great port. It never freezes. It's a deep, deep port. Halifax is Nova Scotia's capital city. It is the second largest natural harbor in the world. 1605, French colonists established the first permanent European settlement in the future Canada, first north of Florida, which was Spanish territory, at Port Royal, founding what would become known as Acadia. And wars were very common. The wars were fought in Nova Scotia, and in that territory were extension of the European wars. Well, there were three causes for the rivalry between French and Britain. Disputes developed over land in the colonies, control of the fur trade in the colonies, which was very lucrative, and over the balance of power in Europe. During the War of Spanish Succession, 1701 to 1714, the British captured Port Royal, the capital of the colony, in the siege. 1713, Treaty of Utrecht concluded the conflict and gave the colony to Great Britain, while allowing Acadians, the French, to keep their lands. This was once the biggest fort in North America. It's called Louisbourg, and the French built it, and it was huge. Today it's a tourist site, about a quarter of the size. For the next 45 years, the Acadians, they're not going to play ball with the Brits. The Brits want them to take an oath of alliance to Britain. There's no way. Absolutely no way. That caused all kinds of problems. Here are the various wars. King William's War, 1688 to 1697. Queen Anne's War, 1702 to 1713. Father Rail's War, 1722 to 1725. King George's War, 1744 to 1748. Father Louis War, 1749 to 1755, and the 7 Years' War, also called the French and Indian War, 1756 to 1763. You know who started that war? George Washington, because he was a screw-up on the battlefield. But that's the next talk. King William's War was fought in the New World areas of the Great Lakes in northern New England and upper New York and the Ohio Valley and the southern frontier. The southern frontier was literally St. Lawrence Seaway, or St. Lawrence River in those days. The main result of the war was the French moved down the Mississippi to New Orleans, built forts along the way. Queen Anne and King George's War. Well, they dealt with the Spanish and Austrian successions to the thrones, respectively. The areas of fighting, southern frontier again, Quebec, St. Lawrence River, Lake Champlain in the Queen Anne's War and in King George's War. The area of fighting was, again, the Ohio Valley, the Great Lakes, and Nova Scotia. It's the Rock of Gibraltar. That's not Nova Scotia. That's not Nova Scotia. But it plays a role in history here. The results of these wars was that Great Britain gained possessions from France in the New World, and they got the Rock of Gibraltar and Gibraltar Island from the Spanish.
Excuse me, why do they use the expression, you're like the Rock of Gibraltar?
Because it's big and it's strong and it's sturdy and it's not going anywhere. This is Louisbourg today. Again, it's a quarter of the size that it once was. In 1730, the French finished building it. It fell in 1758. Louisbourg was sacked by the British and demolished. Meanwhile, England is making more strides. This is Quebec City. Anybody here been to Quebec City over the years? Yeah, nice place, nice place. Plains of Abraham. And that's basically where we are speaking English, more than likely because of what happened there than any other event in North America. During the 7 Years' War, 1759, the British, under the command of General James Wolfe, besieged Quebec City for 3 months. And you are looking down from the top of the Plains of Abraham at the St. Lawrence Seaway. And this is all a cliff area that you would think would be very hard to climb. Quebec City was defended by the French general, the Marquis de Montcalm. It was a very short battle. The Plains of Abraham lasted 15 minutes, culminated in a British victory and the surrender of Quebec, and basically relegated Quebecois to second-class citizens. That is the Plains of Abraham. And behind that was the Chateau Frontenac. The British and French had coexisted in North America, but the threat of French expansionism into the Ohio Valley caused the British to attempt to eradicate New France, which is what it was called, from the map completely. The Battle of the Plains of Abraham, 1759, Quebec City was permanently lost by the French. And that's the lighthouse behind the fort in Louisbourg. In 1763, France formally ceded its claims to Canada, and Quebec's French-speaking population, a Catholic population, came under the rule of the Protestant British. Britain goes home. The war is over. But the start of the United States can be traced back to the fall of Quebec City. How many of you read Evangeline? I remember very little of it. The Forest Primeval and all that other stuff. Well, Evangeline tells the story of ethnic cleansing by the British in Nova Scotia. And there's no way around it. It was ethnic cleansing. A young American, how many of you read Evangeline in school?
Read what?
Evangeline.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because young American elementary school students are generally introduced to Canada by a poem. Evangeline, A Tale of Acadia, is a poem by the American poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow, published in 1847. The poem follows an Acadian girl named Evangeline, her search for her lost love, Gabriel, set at the time of what is nicely called the expulsion of the Acadians, because I guess ethnic cleansing of the Canadians probably, or rather the Acadians, probably would not be all that great in history books. The expulsion of the Acadians was a forced removal by the British of Acadian people from Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, and Prince Edward Island, parts of an area known as Acadia. Some of the Acadians ended up in Louisiana and formed American Cajun culture. How many of you like Cajun culture food? You do. So it starts in Nova Scotia because they're all kicked out if they were able to survive getting off of Nova Scotia. The expulsion, 1755 to 1764, occurred during the French and Indian War. 14,100 Acadians in the region, approximately 11,500, most of them are quote-unquote deported. This is George's Island, and it's a rather unique place in the middle of Halifax's harbor in that there was a prison there. And if you survived that prison, you were going to be let out, but then you would virtually be put on a raft and they'd set you free, and you'd have to survive somehow. During the 7 Years' War, 2,000 French sailors were imprisoned on the island after the British victory in the Battle of Cape Race in Newfoundland. Fort Charlotte was one of 4 forts where Acadians were imprisoned over 9 years during the expulsion. According to the historian Ronnie Gillis LeBlanc, there were approximately 1,660 Acadians held prisoner on the island during the deportation, which lasted 1755 to 1763. 600 prisoners at a time. Most of them died. You walk up and down the Halifax harbor front, they have all kind of little things like that. There's actually a panel dedicated to the Jewish Britain Army of 1914 that served during the Great War, and David Ben-Gurion is part of those pictures. Anyway, this one is We Remember, and we're sorry. We're absolutely sorry for kicking you out of here and causing your death. Nova Scotia's up here. And if somehow you survived and got a boat, maybe you would end up down here in Louisiana. And a lot of people did end up in Louisiana. They became known as Cajuns. The result of the expulsion was a devastation of the primarily civilian population, and the economy of the region. Thousands of Acadians died in the expulsions, mainly from diseases and drowning when ships were lost. Was it an expulsion or was it ethnic cleansing? Well, it ended up being ethnic cleansing. Walking to New Orleans, Louisiana was transferred to Spanish government in 1762 because of good relations between Spain and France. And the common Catholic religion, some Acadians chose to take the oath of allegiance to the Spanish government. Soon, the Acadians comprised the largest ethnic group in Louisiana. And Louisiana is home. Ask for Louisiana seafood. The Acadians' migration from Canada was spurred by the 1763 Treaty of Paris, which ended the war. Treaty terms provided 18 months for unrestrained immigration. Many Acadians moved to a region called Attapaca in present-day Louisiana, often traveling through the French colony of Saint-Dominique, or Haiti. And that is George's Island. And if you got there, your life is pretty much over. Welcome back. Well, welcome back. It is July 11th, 1764. The British government passes an order in council to permit Acadians to legally return to the British territories. However, they have to take that oath of allegiance. A lot of them said, no way. Some returned to Nova Scotia, but when they got back, even after taking the oath to the country, their land was all gone. Meanwhile, down in Louisiana, the Acadian settlers began cultivating the land for agriculture, fished the Gulf of Mexico, and the surrounding bayous. Others who were down in Louisiana at the time were Spanish, Canary Islanders, Native Americans, descendants of African slaves, French Creoles from the Caribbean. All of them settled down there, and all of them are basically put under the same net as Cajuns. And have you ever spoken to Cajuns? Well, they don't shut up. That's the first thing. They'll talk and talk and talk. And they speak with a French accent in Louisiana. They all speak with a French accent. In 1763, most of Acadia, or Cape Breton Island, St. John Island, now Prince Edward Island, and New Brunswick became part of Nova Scotia. In 1769, St. John Island became a separate colony. Okay, why is Halifax and why is Nova Scotia so important? Well, it's pretty simple. It's the port, and the port is one of the greatest ports on the East Coast. Well, you have Nova Scotia, you have Boston, you have New York, you have Philadelphia, you have Charleston, South Carolina. It's probably a better port than any of the other fours. Ice-free, it's always ice-free, so the harbor is accessible year-round. It's one of the world's deepest harbors, and it's the closest North American port to Europe. And the first one sailors saw during the exploration days. Well, the United States had a good chance at getting Nova Scotia. Really good chance of getting Nova Scotia. After all, Nova Scotia was just separated by water from Massachusetts, so it was common people. Nova Scotia is here, Massachusetts, now Maine, is here, and of course the border is even closer when you get out towards now New Brunswick, but in those days Nova Scotia and Massachusetts. But Washington decides Nova Scotia isn't worth the ammunition. Nova Scotia was in a dither over whether the colonies should join the southern colonies in their defiance of Britain, And rebellion flared at the Battle of Fort Cumberland in 1776 and the Siege of St. John in 1777. Ultimately, George Washington decided not to go after Nova Scotia and went after Quebec. Benedict Arnold thought it would be a good idea to capture Quebec during the winter. Anybody been to Quebec during the winter? Well, he had no idea. And it's cold, really cold, bone-chilling cold. And the locals knew about the weather. The Continental Army was defeated in Quebec City. Well, meanwhile, over in Nova Scotia, by the end of the war, Nova Scotia had outfitted a number of privateers to attack American shipping. British military forces were based in Halifax, and they prevented American support for rebels in Nova Scotia. There were people in Nova Scotia who wanted to join with the southern colonies. A lot of skullduggery going on, a lot of double dipping going on with money. While the British captured many American privateers in battles such as the naval battle off of Halifax in 1782, many more continued attacks on shipping and settlements until the final months of the war. Of course, the Americans would win in Yorktown in 1781. The war is just about done, and that would allow England to go back to fighting against France eventually on the European continent. September 3rd, 1783, I will read this to you. It is the Treaty of Paris. In 1783, American and British negotiators signed a treaty ceasing hostilities and recognizing America's independence. The war formally ended in a Paris hotel on the morning of September 3rd, 1783, when both sides signed a treaty pledging to auld lang syne, to forget past misunderstandings and differences. The treaty recognized the colonies as the United States of America, established boundaries, guaranteed that both nations would enjoy free passage on the Mississippi River. Well, it's all done, right? Except there's a problem. And the problem is the Loyalists. Where do they go? Well, the Brits decided, we'll cut Nova Scotia in half, and we will make the land in New Brunswick, newly called New Brunswick, well, that's where people like this guy could end up. By the way, Benedict Arnold is a hero in New Brunswick. That's what, 300 miles north of the American border? Less than that. Anyway, is he a hero? Or is he a no-goodnik?
Traitor.
He's a traitor.
Where you live.
Depends where you live, right? And there is old Benedict right over my head in St. John, New Brunswick. He is considered a hero there, or was. He had some problems there. Nova Scotia included present-day New Brunswick until the establishment of the province in 1784, after the arrival of what was called the United Empire Loyalists. Nova Scotia has been unchanged since then. The United Empire Loyalists lost the American Revolution. 33,000 Tories settled in Nova Scotia on lands granted by the Crown, some as compensation for their losses down in America. And Benedict Arnold has a plaque in Quebec City. He has a plaque in Quebec City. And there it is. Let's put it this way. They had Benedict Arnold there, and then they found out who the real Benedict Arnold was. 1785, Arnold and his son Richard moved to St. John, New Brunswick, where they speculated in land and established a business doing trade with the West Indies. Arnold purchased large tracts of land, acquired city lots in St. John's and Fredericton. But the family had to leave St. John and return to London in December 1791. Reason why? I don't know. Benedict Arnold was disliked by the locals. A lot of bad business deals. A lot of petty lawsuits. So maybe he's not that much of a hero in New Brunswick afterwards. Meanwhile, up in Sydney, Nova Scotia, British loyalists fleeing the American Revolution, they are the ones who have established this town in 1785, and the settlement soon prospered from rich natural resources. In its heyday, Jobs in the steel factories and coal mines attracted settlers from many lands, including many who came over from the Scottish Highlands. And to this day, you hear the Gaelic brogue in Sydney. Their influence is still evident. Cape Breton is one of the rare places in North America where Gaelic is spoken, and Celtic music is heard everywhere. Everywhere there's Celtic music. That's Halifax, and that is the Citadel. Have you been there? Have you been there? Anybody been to the Citadel? It's an interesting place. The Halifax Citadel is now a National Historic Site. It's on top of a hill. It has a look, it looks over the Halifax Harbor, and it was chosen in 1749 for that very purpose, to protect the harbor and the city. Erected between 1826 and 1856 on Halifax's highest hill, it dominates the skyline. It's Canada's most visited National Historic Site. It's a magnet for tourists. The present Citadel has a dry moat, some stone ramparts, and there was a fourth defensive structure that was built on the site, and it used to be linked to smaller forts and gun emplacements on harbor islands and bluffs above the harbor's entrance. And now you could hang out with a Mountie, because that's all that's there, Mounties. Now you figure Nova Scotia would go on in separate ways, right? That they'll stay with the Brits and everybody will be happy. Have you ever heard of the rebellions? Because Nova Scotia ended up with buyer's remorse. And it only took them about 60 years or so to figure out we made a big mistake. A couple guys hanging, the rebellions. During the rebellions of 1837 and 1838, Upper and Lower Canada, hundreds of armed citizens rose up against the government, protesting the injustices of the ruling elite, demanding changes in politics and the economics of imperial rule in British North America. The revolt in Lower Canada was more serious and more violent than the rebellion in the upper part of Canada. Lord Durham has a report in 1839 about what happened with the rebellion. He was sent by the Crown in 1838. He wants to know, why was there a rebellion in Quebec? Why was there a rebellion in Nova Scotia, in New Brunswick, and in Ontario? And Durham's report on the affairs of British North America led to a series of reforms and changes. These included uniting the two Canadas into a single colony called the Province of Canada in 1841. Durham proposed the creation of municipal governments in the Supreme Court in the British North American colonies. He also wanted to resolve the land question in Prince Edward Island. His long-held plan for the union of all BNA, British North American territories or colonies, was dropped because Nova Scotia and New Brunswick were not interested. Quebec. Well, Lord Durham pours fire on the English-French differences with his report. Durham believed that the problems in mostly French Lower Canada were ethnic in nature, not political. He found two nations warring in the bosom of a single state. Durham was culturally biased against the French Canadians. He called them a people with no literature and no history. By the way, Henry Ford said the same thing about Jews in 1919. Just putting it out there. He recommended assimilating them by uniting the Canadas in a way that would allow the English-speaking majority in Upper Canada to dominate. Durham's report was condemned by Upper Canada's Tory elite. Reformers in Upper Canada and in Nova Scotia hailed the idea of responsible government, and Nova Scotia would lead the way. It became the first colony in British North America and in the British Empire to achieve responsible government in January-February 1848, and became self-governing through the efforts of Joseph Howe. Nova Scotia had established representative government in 1858, and if you do the math, that would be roughly about 82 years after they had a chance to join the United States. Another picture of the Citadel in Halifax. Thousands of Nova Scotians fought in the American Civil War. Did you know that? Do you know Nova Scotians fought for the North in the Civil War?
No.
They did. The British Empire, including Nova Scotia, declared itself neutral in the conflict because Britain and Nova Scotia wanted to continue trade with both the North and the South. This is the Confederate ship, the CSS Tallahassee. That's in Halifax Harbor in 1864. So Nova Scotia is part of the Civil War. Whether you learned about it or not, it is part of the Civil War in America. Nova Scotia's economy boomed during the Civil War. Halifax was the main hub for U.S. Confederate shipping cotton to England. Most British North Americans or Canadians were anti-slavery, and most Canadian agriculture and manufacturing goods went to the North. How many of you heard about the Underground Railroad? That's where runaway slaves would get on the railroad and end up somewhere where they could be safe. Well, in this case, it was Nova Scotia. That's where the Underground Railroad went.
Slaves, the
What?
underground.
No, it was abolitionists helping the former slaves. The Underground Railroad was a secret network of abolitionists. They helped African Americans escape from enslavement in the American South to free northern states or to Canada. The Underground Railroad was the largest anti-slavery freedom movement in North America. It brought between 30,000 and 40,000 fugitives to British North America, including Nova Scotia. They were safe in Nova Scotia. 1850, there was the Fugitive Slave Act, which basically the federal government could kidnap free slaves or ex-slaves and bring them back to the South. If they got to Canada, America was not doing that. They wouldn't dare do that. Africville was an African-Canadian village located just north of Halifax, founded in the mid-18th century. The city of Halifax demolished the once prosperous seaside community in the 1960s in what many said was an act of racism. The mayor of the Halifax Regional Municipality apologized for the action in 2010. For many people, Africville represented the oppression faced by black Canadians in the efforts to right historic wrongs. I knew a guy by the name of Norman McLean. He was a sports writer in the New York area, and you don't need to know him, but one of his relatives has a very, very interesting story. His name is Wilmer McLean. And it seems that the Civil War both started on his property and ended on his property.
Oh.
Which is a historic anomaly, isn't it? That a war would start and end on some innocent guy's property. That's Wilmer McLean. And in fact, his relative looked a lot like him. Civil War started on his property, Bull Run, 1861. Ended on Appomattox, the property, his Appomattox property, in 1865. His family, like many others in the Confederate States, fled to Nova Scotia, but not him. His relative, who I knew, was born in Truro, Nova Scotia. Back in 1865, his Appomattox home was looted by General Ulysses S. Grant and his officers. He would live out his life in Virginia. His heirs sued the U.S. to get back their property, which sits in a warehouse in Cleveland, not in a museum. And his heirs are still fighting to get that property back. It is not on display anywhere. It's sitting in a warehouse in Cleveland, Ohio. You can't see it. They looted it. There was also something else called the Colored Hockey League. And that started in the 1890s. It was in the Maritimes, all-black ice hockey team, founded in Nova Scotia, 1895. Featured teams from across Canada's maritime provinces, which would be PEI, Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and New Brunswick. And the league operated for several decades, lasting until the Depression, 1930. Pastor James Borden of Dartmouth Church, James A.R. Kinney, a lawyer and community leader, James Robinson Johnston, a lawyer, and Pan-African organizer Henry Sylvester Williams put the league together. The league was constructed to attract young black men to Sunday worship. with the promise of a hockey game between rival churches after services. According to the Canadian Encyclopedia, with the influence of the black nationalism movement and with a rising interest in the sport of hockey, the league came to be seen as a potential driving force for equality of black Americans. Well, it's a nation, but it really isn't a nation. It's still part of the British Crown, and that would actually continue until 1982. Soon after the American Civil War, the pro-Canadian Confederation premier, Charles Tupper, led Nova Scotia into the Canadian Confederation July 1st, 1867, with New Brunswick and the province of Canada. So, by the way, Alexander Graham Bell, how many of you, when you answer your phone, say hello?
Yeah.
Yeah, right? Not him. He wanted you to answer your phone, ahoy, ahoy. Never caught on. Would you like to answer your phone, ahoy, ahoy?
No.
You like hello?
No.
Or as Bugs Bunny would say, start talking, it's your nickel. 1871, while living in Nova Scotia, Bell started working on the harmonic telegraph, a device that allowed multiple messages to be transmitted over a wire at the same time. While trying to perfect this technology, which was backed by a group of investors, Bell became preoccupied with finding a way to transmit the human voice over wires. Bell Telephone. You don't see that anymore, that logo. But that is the logo for Bell Telephone, the Bell system. Bell was born in Scotland. He was raised in Cape Breton, and he'd work on his invention and his homes in Nova Scotia and in the United States. On March 7, 1876, Bell was granted U.S. patent 174465A for a method of transmitting speech by telegraphy. In Boston, the first telephone call was made on March the 10th, 1876. The first words were, Mr. Watson, Thomas Watson, his assistant, come here, I want to see you. But he didn't say ahoy, ahoy. His next phone call, he said ahoy, ahoy. And this is Baddeck in Nova Scotia, and that's the Alexander Graham Bell site. He died at his private estate in Cape Breton, Nova Scotia, age of 75, August 2nd, 1922. Oh, by the way, you think Alexander Graham Bell had a phone in his office?
No.
No, he didn't. He didn't. Didn't want any phone calls. It would distract him from his work.
That's very crazy, isn't it?
The Titanic. Okay, how many of you know the story of the Titanic? Yeah, hits an iceberg, goes right down. Super ship, biggest ship in the world, goes right down. Well, in Halifax, there is the Titanic gravesite. The Maritime Museum of the Atlantic has an exhibit dedicated to the sinking of the Titanic, where there's a deck chair from the ship, one of the few in the world still intact on display. Other Titanic artifacts are housed there, including oak molding from the forward first-class staircase. Now that's my old Grundig radio. I don't use it anymore. I'd like to use it. It played well, but there are tubes in there. And the question is, if a tube burns out, where would I get a tube to replace it these days?
Nowhere.
Well, you probably could find someone who has old tubes or anything else. But this is a pretty good radio. It had AM, FM, it had shortwave. I used to listen to Radio Bulgaria on the shortwave radio, but it's just in my house now, and people could look at it and say, hey, isn't that an old radio? And I said, yeah, it's 74 years old, my old Grundig radio. In 1912, a guy by the name of David Sarnoff managed the Marconi wireless station at the How many of you remember Wanamaker's? How many of you went there? If you went to Cross County, you could go into Wanamaker's.
I went to Macy's.
Macy's, there was a Macy's, but there was a Wanamaker
I
there.
knew it was there.
Yeah, you never went to John Wanamaker's, you just went to Macy's. That's why they're out of business, because she didn't go there and help them. Anyway, so Sarnoff's in the wireless in the store. at the wireless station down in Manhattan, the Wanamaker department store. On the evening of April the 14th, 1912, the ocean liner Titanic struck an iceberg and started taking in water. And there is Sarnoff at his station. Almost immediately, the ship began transmitting distress signals. Soon the airwaves were flooded with the news of a disaster as operators tracked the rescue efforts. After 3 days at the Wanamaker post, he traveled to Marconi Seagate Station, Coney Island. How many of you used to go to Coney Island? Back in the day. Not too many of you. And contacted the steamship, the Carpathia, which had picked up survivors from the Titanic and was returning to New York. Sarnoff proceeded to compile the list of names of the passengers who survived, sent it by telegraph, the news to their families. And he comes up with an idea. We could put voice to this. We could make a ton of money. We could do radio. All we have to do is get the spectrum from the government, play around with it, and we could start radio. And there were radio stations around in those days. Mostly it was the radio stations just transmitting Morse code. Congress had previously hesitated to regulate the airwaves, but they seized on the disaster and they passed the Radio Act of 1912. The law divided the electromagnetic spectrum between amateur, government, and commercial users, mandated that all American operators, even experienced ones like David Sarnoff, had to be licensed. Don't tell anybody, but when I started in radio when I was 15, I didn't have a license. That was 1971. Just don't tell anybody. I never had a license. I was supposed to get a third-class license. I never did. Didn't need it, so I thought. To accommodate the demand for trained wireless experts, the Marconi Company recruited Sarnoff to act as an instructor at the newly organized Technical Institute. He would hook up with the Radio Corporation of America, and this is what he would come up with. The NBC Red and Blue networks in 1926. Sinking of the Titanic brought radio into the public spotlight and prompted the U.S. Congress to regulate the medium for the first time. Sarnoff would refer to this incident as an important turning point in his career. The Titanic disaster brought radio to the front, and incidentally me. I might have, but there were other people out there too, but he took the credit for it. Now, the biggest explosion, man-made explosion that ever took place here in Halifax on December 6, 1917. It was the biggest explosion in the world until the United States dropped the atomic bomb on Hiroshima. And the way you're all looking at me, virtually nobody here has ever heard of this explosion. You have? Okay. It's December 6, 1917. The world's at war, World War I. And some of it is coming to the North American shores. Not really most of it, but some of it. December 6, 1917, a French munition ship collides with a steamer, the Mont Blanc, blew up with more than 2,000 casualties and leveling parts of the city. Boston sent aid to this day, and it sends aid to this day, and receives an annual Christmas tree for help and helping with putting out the fires in the Halifax explosion. That's what the explosion looked like. That's exactly what the explosion looked like. 1,600 people were killed instantly, 9,000 injured, 300 of whom died later. Every building within 2.6 kilometers or 1.6 miles, over 12,000 in total, badly destroyed or badly damaged. That's the memorial, and I was there in 2017. Friends of mine and my wife took us out there, and they were still putting together, this is October 2017, they're still fixing up for the big day on December the 6th, which commemorated the 100th anniversary of the explosion. Hundreds of people had been watching the fires from their homes, and they're blinded because there was a blast wave that shattered windows in front of them. Houses were redesigned. This is a redesigned house with fireproof roof and all of that stuff. This was the neighborhood that was taken down which would be to the west of the harbor. An extensive comparison of 130 major explosions by Halifax historian Jay White, 1994, concluded that the Halifax harbor remains unchallenged in overall magnitude as long as 5 criteria are considered together: number of casualties, force of the blast, radius of devastation, quantity of explosive material, and total value of property destroyed. For many years afterwards, the Halifax explosion was the standard by which all blasts were measured. For instance, in its report on the atomic bombing of Hiroshima, Time magazine wrote that the explosive power of the little boy bomb, which dropped on Hiroshima, was 7 times that of the Halifax explosion. Well, how many of you have heard of Ellis Island? How many of you have heard of Pier 21?
Of what?
Pier 21. Okay, well, when the immigration was taking place in the 1880s, 1890s, 1900s through 1924 in the United States, they were doing the same thing. And there were 2 points of entry in Canada. One was in the eastern part, not the west, because they had Vancouver there, the eastern part. One was Halifax, Pier 21, and that's back over there. And the other was in St. John, New Brunswick. The most famous guy who came through St. John's, New Brunswick, you might have heard, Louis B. Mayer from MGM. He came through St. John's. Now, back in the heyday of the immigration, particularly for Jews, there were 5 sites. There was Halifax, there was St. John's, there was Boston, there was New York, and there was Galveston, Texas. Why Galveston? Well, the rabbis in Boston and New York got together and got to talking. We have too many Jews on the Lower East Side. We have too many Jews on the north end of Boston, and there's a lot of anti-Semitism. There's a port down in Galveston, and that's where some of the Jews ended up, in Galveston. So that was the 5th option, and also for Italians and others. Pier 21 was an ocean liner terminal and an immigration shed from 1928 to 1971 in Halifax, Nova Scotia. Nearly 1 million immigrants came into Canada through Pier 21. Among the families that came in, William Shatner's family. Ever hear of William Shatner? He was another one that came in. And it's the last surviving seaport immigration facility in Canada. On September 22nd, 1997, the Pier 21 facility was designated a National Historic Site of Canada on the recommendation of Historic Sites and Monuments Board of Canada because of the facility's major role in 20th century immigration in Canada. Well, there are a lot of ties between Nova Scotia and Maine. One of them is the Portland-Halifax ferry that goes back and forth every day, taking people from Maine to Nova Scotia. Also in Nova Scotia, there are a whole bunch of really nice little resorts that if you don't want to go to a United States resort, hey, go up to Nova Scotia. They got Peggy Cove and a whole bunch of other places that are really nice. But you might not be able to get this.
That's the Nova Scotia I know.
That's the Nova Scotia you know. Bagel, cream cheese, and lox. That is the Nova Scotia, but you can't get it there because there's no Nova Scotia lox, not called Nova Scotia lox. PEI and Nova Scotia, both could have been part of the United States. Halifax is among, or was among, the fastest growing areas in North America prior to the COVID-19 outbreak. But George Washington didn't think it was worth the effort to take Nova Scotia. And that's when Nova Scotia was thinking about becoming the 14th colony. In fact, Nova Scotia, Washington said, and it was going to be there. They handed it to him on a platter, and he said, now we need to save the cost of ammunition for somewhere else. We don't need the ports. We have Boston, we have Philadelphia, we have New York, we have Charleston. We don't need the ports, so we're not going. We'll go for Quebec instead. Oh, by the way, the Quebecois hated the southern colonists. They called them hedonists and godless. That's what they thought. Well, they were probably thinking of Benjamin Franklin. PEI wanted to join the United States, but they weren't allowed to by the Brits. They thought they had a deal, and they would have come in after the Civil War, but it never happened. Nova Scotia, well, it took them about 60 some odd years, maybe 70 years to realize, you know what? We could have had a good deal had we gone with the southern colonists, but they decided to stick to the north. And Nova Scotia has a history. So we say goodbye to Halifax, and a cheer, as they would give you, saying goodbye to Halifax and to Nova Scotia. So any questions about Nova Scotia? Did you know about all of the history of Nova Scotia?
Overwhelmed.
Overwhelmed? Overwhelmed? So how many of you enjoy Cajun culture? Food, Cajun food. I like Cajun food. So where did it come from? It came from Nova Scotia. Nova Scotia has a long history with the United States, and it should. It's right next to the United States. It's separated by water. And Nova Scotia Halifax has a deal with Boston. They are on the Atlantic time zone, so right now it would be almost 4 o'clock there. And Newfoundland's the strange one because they are on 90-minute time difference than the East Coast. It's about 4:30 or almost 4:30 up in St. John in Newfoundland. Any questions or comments? Go ahead. Nothing?
Sorry.
Yes.
This term about Newfoundland I've never heard before.
That's